Coach VJ.
How's it
I know
going?
you. I'm doing really good, but I need your help with something. Kind of
Let's go.
need your help figuring this out. So I heard you're like probably the confidence queen from what I heard. Like you're just like the excellent high level talker about this. I know you get confidence thrown out a lot. You hear this a lot now when it comes to either personal development or basketball development. But from what you see, what do you feel like gets misunderstood the most or is being mistaught the most when it comes to confidence?
I don't know if it's being mistaught. I think whether I'm working with a pro athlete, college athlete, even all the way down to high school, I think the thing that gets in the way of most of us is we don't understand or we can't identify where we actually get our confidence from. And so if you can't identify that for yourself, then you're likely going to be getting your confidence from something that you can't always control. And so what I find along the lines, and even if I'm working with pros a lot of times, oftentimes there's three outer sources of confidence that I teach. And across the board, whenever I go and I speak to a group of athletes or I'm working one on one with an athlete, and I always ask the question, hey, where do you get your confidence from? Surprisingly, sometimes people can't even answer. Athletes can't even answer. Even entrepreneurs, corporate athletes, it's like, I don't know. I've never thought about it. But if you can't give me that answer, like, where do you get your confidence from? Then that begins or that begets the bigger problem, right? If you can't identify for yourself where you're getting your confidence from, then likely it comes from a source that, again, you're not in control of. And not that we can always control it, but if you're likely to have a better understanding of those variables, then you're likely to be in better control of your confidence. And so, what I'm finding a lot of times is that validation piece, right? So, when I ask, hey,
Mm,
where do you get your confidence from? 99.8% of the time, they will answer, and this is across the board, like, doesn't matter what age, they will answer, and a coach. Teammates are a big one, right? Get my confidence from my teammates. They'll name
mhm,
another person, whether that's mom, dad, coach, teammate, brother, sister, like whatever it is. And so I think more than anything, it's can you identify for yourself where do you actually get your confidence from? And if it is that outer source, okay, now what do we need to do to overcome those and focus on the things that we can somewhat control?
mm. Is that wrong for having that be the source of confidence too?
It's not wrong, right? And so when you think of these outer sources, like they're still sources, they're just outer
Mhm,
sources. And so what I teach is just think of like these inner sources. These inner sources of confidence are your practice and your preparation, your mindset and your self talk, which I honestly believe is the most important source of confidence. Because when we're talking about athletes, like everybody's doing the work, like everybody's
mhm,
putting in the time, right? Especially like if you're listening to this podcast, you're putting in the reps, you're putting in the time. Like we don't have to talk to you about putting in that work. But oftentimes, what I'm finding is the mindset and the self talk. Because if you put in the work and then you go and you're ready to perform, and that mindset and self talk talks you out of all that work, that practice, that preparation you put in, then it just completely negates it. Right. And just
mhm,
like that, 10,000 hours behind your belt, and in 30 seconds, it can just be gone. That's the
mhm,
power that this has over you. Right. And then the third inner source of confidence is courage and curiosity in my mind, right? It's courage and curiosity.
mhm,
So, what I like to teach is build up your foundation of confidence on solid ground, on those inner sources of confidence that you have more control over. That's like the fire that's within you, right? We want to keep
mhm,
adding to that fire on that solid foundation. Now, when you get these outer sources of confidence, that's like fuel you add to the fire. Throw in a little bit of validation, great. Throw in a little bit of comparison, working for you, awesome. Throw in a little bit of recent success, you're adding fuel to that fire. Now, that's a great thing, but we don't want to build our fire on those outer sources. We want to focus on the inner sources.
mm. I love what you said about courage because just really thinking through confidence and how it's developed and how it's worked through. I've heard some people describe it and it kind of says something in the line of being bold and being courageous. And I'm like, okay, I feel like that's a piece of it, but trying to think through like the order and what's the process of it. So I feel like the first part is self awareness. Seeing who you are, where you are, knowing where you're at, knowing what you're trying to get to, knowing what's actually possible. Sometimes we have the confidence to go after a goal, but it's like, oh, I can't become $100 million earner in a year. It's like that's kind of crazy. So self awareness. Then the second step is being courageous, being bold enough to step up and do it. And I think that's the piece that stands out a lot. And so when it comes to being courageous and bold, what do you feel like that lines up for you in terms of the orders of building your confidence?
Well, I call this getting out of your dead zone. So you know this as your
Mm,
comfort zone. I despise that term. I don't like talking about comfort zones because the comfort zone is a beautiful place that you will never grow. And if you've heard me speak before, if anybody's ever heard me speak before, they've heard me talk about this dead zone. And so when you're thinking about the dead zone, that's the prison you create for yourself, right? It's where you
mhm,
choose to stay small. It's where you choose to stay comfortable. And the only way that courage or the only time that courage is needed is when you're feeling uncomfortable or when you're in a space of unfamiliarity or uncertainty. And the courage that is
mm,
warranted in those situations, those are the moments that you tend to grow. I don't know of anybody that has seen transformative growth when they were comfortable, right? All those
mhm.
moments come on the other side of it. And that's why courage is talked about so often. But I'm curious when we're talking about confidence, like what's something that you've seen like as a big hiccup or a problem that you see with some of the athletes that you've been around or that you work with? What kind of confidence issues come up with your line of work?
Mm. Oh, being very, very tough graders and being very hard on themselves, not celebrating the small wins that add up to being more confident. Like they're kind of, I'm guilty of this too, dismissing the small pieces that build up confidence. So if we're working on somebody's shot, they're trying to rebuild their confidence on that. They'll kind of dismiss the small steps it takes to rebuild their shot in their form and just skip over that because I'm still not making shots. It's like, no, 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 slow down. You couldn't even think about holding the ball the right way the first time. You were airball and everything. Let's celebrate the fact that you're hitting the rim now. So they would skip over the small wins along the way and just ignore everything in that process and try to go straight to making Steph Curry like shots.
Mm.
So that's a big thing of like ignoring the small wins that add up to that big boost of confidence. So ignoring the small little confidence boosters to ignore that to get to the big one.
Do you think, like hearing you say that they're trying to get to the Steph Curry type of shot, do you think it's
Mhm.
largely due to comparison that gets them to think that way? Like they're comparing themselves to a Steph Curry outcome compared to where they're at?
A little bit. I think it's just not respecting the process, I guess you can say,
Hmm.
and trying to just, oh, I should be good in a week. I should be good in 2 weeks because I've been training, working on it. But not realizing that Steph Curry wasn't Steph Curry in 2 weeks or 2 years. It took a long time to get that. So I think it's a little bit of the comparison of whether it's Steph Curry or their peers, and maybe comparison of their old self of saying, I used to be able to shoot, but that was with the old form and the old team that I was with. So now, because I had to tear the house back down and rebuild the foundation, it's taking me a little bit longer to get to this new point now. So I think it's comparison to old self, comparison of peers, the ones like Steph Curry, and just not accepting that the process will take a long time too.
Yeah. Yeah. I call this the growth cycle. And so when you think about the growth cycle,
Mm,
there's a couple of different stages whenever you're learning anything, right? It doesn't matter in what domain and what field, what your craft is. You have to start off by learning. And this is a cyclical, right? It's a cycle. So you start off by
mm,
learning and then you have to practice that skill. And then hopefully in time, you'll get to the point where you can put that into competitive terms or it's a performance, right? You're performing. And then hopefully at some point in time, you'll get to the thrive stage. And so whether you're learning, practicing, performing, or thriving, typically all of those steps within that cycle have one thing in common. It's the struggle. It's the struggle, right? It's
mm,
the struggle. And so you can put this in any format you want. We'll put it in basketball. So whenever you're working, let's just say with an athlete that's just learning the game, they're just learning how to dribble. They probably can't get more than 3 dribbles in a row before it, rolls off on them. But
mhm,
that's the learns, like, they're still learning and practicing. Or even with a layup, you think about a layup, right? Just doing a regular with your dominant hand, no defense. Now we're in the thrive stage for majority, let's just say a high school or college athlete. They're not having to think about what foot am I jumping off of? What is this elbow doing? How am I releasing the ball? Where am I aiming for off the like it just comes natural, right? That's the thrive stage. But
mhm.
any point there up until that thrive stage, you're dealing with the struggle. It's the suck,
Yeah.
right? It's the suck, it's the struggle, it's what you have to go through in order to get through that thrive stage. And even when you are in that thrive stage, we'll continue with the example of Steph Curry. There are still moments, even though he's in that thrive stage with his shot, where he still struggles. But
Mhm,
that's the beauty of the game and that's the beauty of life because without any struggle, like once you're on the other side of it, would it be as meaningful?
mm. That's what I wrestle with a lot of. just being in that pocket where it's frustrating. You're dealing with a lot of losses. You're basically dealing with the growing pains and knowing that if you could just skip over it and um, just get to the end result, it wouldn't feel as good. And my confidence probably wouldn't be as high just because I know that, okay, there's no way I can't feel good about myself knowing that I dealt with all the losses, dealing with all the negativity, the inner battles that you have, like knowing that you overcame all of that boosts my confidence even more. So, how do we kind of deal with that self talk and with that battle of dealing with the growing pains while we're in the middle of it?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different ways I can go with this, but I guess it just largely comes down to, well, this is where I would start. And for me, it's always with the
Mm,
awareness is what are those words of poison you tend to tell yourself that's getting you from achieving your goal? Because oftentimes, again, it's this. And so I'll just share a quick example. When I was playing professional basketball in Greece, it was my very first practice in Greece.
mm,
And we just started off with a basic layup drill, and I ended up missing 3 layups in a row. Right. And
mm,
so at that point in time, these words of poison that started infiltrating my mind, I started telling myself, like, you thought you could be a pro basketball player. You don't have what it takes. You're a joke. They're going to cut you and send you home. See, you didn't belong out here. Like, you really thought that you could compete at this level. Right. So then we start to believe that internal narrative. And I think oftentimes when it does come to our confidence for whatever reason, all of us, everybody, nobody is immune from these words of poison. And again, if you can identify those for what they are, when they actually show up in the moments that matter, in those meaningful moments, whether it's your first professional basketball practice where you're trying to make the team, it's a state championship game, or there's a college coach in the stands, whatever it is. Like if you give into those words of poison the minute something goes wrong, it's really hard to come out on the other side of that. Right. So I
mm,
think for me, the first step always is can you identify for yourself what those words of poison are for you so that when they show up, you just understand them for the story that they are and not the truth that they're trying to sell.
mm. You had this line, and I loved it. It said, "Failure is an event, not an identity." And I was like, "Oh, that's really beautiful." Can you expound upon that a little bit more?
I mean, it's so true. And a lot of these things that I teach, it's because I've lived it. It's because I've
Mm,
experienced it. And I say all the time the reason why I am a mental performance coach, the reason why I have to study mental strength and resilience and toughness and all these things is because I'm naturally not all of those things. And so I have to spend time working on it. And so we go back to the failure piece. Um, the first time I had like solidly failed at something, it was my junior year in college, and I actually got a big fat F, not on a test, the entire class. Like I failed the class. Okay, I'm a college
man.
student athlete. GPAs matter. I'm freaking out. Right, this is the first time I've
Mhm,
gotten an F. Like, okay, yeah, maybe in the past, like on a pop quiz or something. Honestly, not even that. I don't think. Honestly, right? Like maybe a
mm,
low C, but an F now I am just beside myself, and I just remember going into my coach's office, and I'm just in tears. I'm thinking like my life is over. This is the first time I've actually failed at anything, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel. I don't know how to overcome this. And
mhm,
I still remember he was just not laughing at me, but he just had this smile over his face, and he's like, "BJ, this isn't the end of the world. Like you're
mhm,
seeing this as an identity, and it's not you. Like it's just something that happened to you." And then, reflection and hindsight, that's when it just clicked because we do this over and over and over again, right?
mhm,
When you fail at something, we make it our identity. We tend to think and tell ourselves, I am a failure. I suck. I can't do this. And we turn that failure into an identity of who we can't become or what we can't achieve because this outcome didn't go our way.
mhm,
And so when you actually flip it and that reminder I give, like, hey, let me just be that coach to remind you, and I get it more than you know. And you're a high achiever, right? You're a perfectionist, you're a striver, whatever word you want to give it. So that failure hurts a little bit more. And there's a
mhm,
reason why there's this saying where it's like, oh, you got to fail forward, or, you got to just stack up those fails. But I don't know of anybody like when you're actually in that failure where it feels good. Like after
mhm,
I just failed at something, if somebody's like, this is how you succeed, like I'm going to want to punch you in the throat. Like, right? It doesn't feel good. Like when you're sitting in that failure, it doesn't feel good. And so this is where we just have to have that reminder where like, hey, this is just something that happened to me. It's not who I am. Failure is an
mhm.
event, not an identity. It's meant to refine you, not define you. But that's so often what we do is we allow it to define our identity when that's the last thing that it should ever do.
Yeah, and you gave an example with one of your speeches of the guy holding the chair, and I
Mm.
think that was an example of how we hold on to our negative words. So once we identify those poisonous words, the next step would be to let it go and hold on something else. Like, what would be your process of
Well, I
fixing the
call it
self-talk?
flipping the script. So
Okay.
whenever we go from poison to power, we're either speaking to ourselves with power or poison. Most of
Mhm,
the time, so whenever we think about the way that we respond to something or react, right? This have you heard of E
mhm.
plus R equals O? It's very common in the mental performance world.
No, I don't think I've heard of it.
Event plus response equals outcome. Event plus response
Mhm,
equals outcome. I think this was Tim Kite who put this into existence. I think it stemmed out of Viktor Frankl, right? Um, anyway, I could say event and then plus your R factor. So when you think about your R factor, you can either respond or react. Most of the time
mhm,
without training, the human brain, the human mind tends to mindlessly react. We want to train ourselves to mindfully respond, right? And so this is where I always start with, hey, can you have awareness? Because when you can bring awareness to your words of poison, whenever we have those words of poison, that's us mindlessly reacting. We're
mm,
mindlessly reacting to those thoughts that we tend to have. But again, if we can now switch that, not only identify it, but then when we have that word of poison, can you flip it into a statement of power? And this is where I kind of have to pause and just share with whoever I'm teaching because I honestly believe that there is such a thing as toxic positivity. Like there's such a thing
mhm,
as toxic positivity. And I just share this example. Hey, since we're hoopers here, let's talk basketball lingo. So if I were to say, let's just say my word of poison is like I suck. All right. So my statement of power, I'm going to say instead of anytime I say I suck, that should just be like an alarm going off in my head. What I'm going to say instead is let's just use the outlandish example. I'm the best shooter in the world. I'm the best shooter in the world, right? Like that's a statement of power. But what do you
mhm,
think is going to happen the moment that I start competing against Caitlin Clark or a Steph Curry? You know, name any great shooter that I know inherently are probably better than me. So
mhm,
because this is toxic positivity, like, yeah, you can be positive all you want, but if it doesn't stem from any type of truth, the moment that you're tested on it, it turns and works against you. That's why we say toxic positivity, right? Because yeah, you're being positive, but it's actually going to be toxic when it matters most. And so what I say with these words of power is it has to stem from some type of truth. So if you can't
mhm,
say that you're the best shooter in the world yet, what can you say that's true? Well, I could say that I'm the hardest worker. Or I could, like and then work until you can make that your truth. Work until that
mhm.
does become the truth. But I think so often, especially now in these days with where we're at in society, like it's just that's what's like this toxic positivity is such a thing. And I'm just like, oh no, this is gonna blow up in your face. Like you
Yeah.
just have to be aware of this stuff.
Especially when it comes to like all the affirmation and the manifestation stuff that we're in now. It's just I think it basically is just toxic positivity, like you were saying, just because you're feeding yourself these outlandish ideas and lies about yourself. Not to say it's not possible, but you're trying to speak into something that isn't true. Like you said, I'm the best shooter in the world, but you just shot 1 for 10 and that's your career high. So like we can't really make those two make sense.
Right. And it's okay to aspire to become that, right? Like it's totally
Mhm,
okay. But again, when you're overcoming these words of poison, it has to stem from some type of truth. That's how we get our power back or how we claim our power. So it's totally okay. Like aspire, absolutely strive, but just be aware of what you're telling yourself in accordance to that.
yeah.
Otherwise, this is where, like your confidence tends to work against you. And this is why sometimes we have imposter syndrome and that kind of thing. It's because you're trying to be someone you're not, right? You're trying you're pretending.
How do you feel about the imposter syndrome idea overall?
When it comes to that, and I learned this from Alex Hormozy, he said something along the lines of state the facts and tell the truth. State the facts and tell the truth, right? And so that's where toxic positivity doesn't work because you're not stating the facts or telling the truth. And so
Mhm.
whenever you can do those things, like if I'm just stating the facts and telling the truth, then how am I an imposter?
Hmm.
right? And so I think a lot of times, as long as you own your stuff, as long as you can own your shortcomings, own, I call them AOIs, I never call them weaknesses. I'm very aware of the words and terminology you put on something because the moment you call something a weakness, that's what it's gonna tend to always be. But if I can
Mm,
call it an area of improvement, that's likely where my mind will go to improve on it, right? And so
mhm,
it's just being aware of these things, being honest with it, owning it. And if you can do that, and what I've learned along the way too is if you can be open and vulnerable about those AOIs that you have for yourself, it actually makes you more human and it connects you better to people.
mm. Yeah, I'm a big Hormozy follower too. Um, and so I agree with that. But then I started thinking about it more. And I thought about it could actually be a compliment to feel like that. So let's say um, we're having a all-star game for players. And it's like, I don't feel qualified for it. But then it's like, hey, you got picked for it. And they're like, well, hold on. I see what the other girls or other guys are doing. All the guys average like 20 points and they're double doubles and so on and so forth. I'm the lowest of the total pole here because I only average 15 or 18 points. I don't feel qualified to be in that situation. And so I could feel like an imposter right there. But it actually be a compliment to say, no, 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 that could disqualify you, but we saw fit that you fit just like as the other people did here. So I think sometimes that can be a compliment to us to pull us up sometimes and bring to the next level when we kind of might be downplaying ourselves and trying to not be humble, but just don't see ourselves in that same way. So how do you kind of feel when it comes to that being the idea too?
Well, I think sometimes, like when you're talking about that, now we're getting back to the comparison game, right? And so you're
Mm,
measuring your self worth based on your comparison to somebody else's outcome, result, or ideal, right? And this is an outer source of confidence again. And this is a big one. We tend to compare. And here we go. You probably heard this over and over again. Comparison is the thief of all joy. You've heard this,
yeah.
yes? I
Yeah.
actually don't agree with that at all. I don't think comparison is the thief of all joy. I think comparison is the ultimate measuring stick,
Hmm.
or comparison is the ultimate measurements tool. Envy is the thief of all joy. And so when you think about comparison, okay, there's one of two ways that you can go. The moment you start comparing yourself, and let me just say, if you're an achiever, if you're a high performer, if you're an athlete, you are comparing yourself to somebody else. And again, this is a source of confidence. But let's use Kobe Bryant as an example. Who did he compare himself and mimic his game after? Michael Jordan. We all know it, right? So here's the difference. Whenever you compare yourself to somebody, and when you're comparing yourself to somebody, you're typically comparing yourself because they have something that you want. Whether they're averaging certain points per game, whether
Hmm.
they have something that you want, right? So when we compare, we can do one of two things. We can either envy or we can study.
Hmm.
We can envy or we can study. And so when you think comparison is a thief of all joy, I think they got it half right. But that's when you're using it against you. Again, comparison can be an amazing thing. Like if Kobe didn't compare himself against Michael Jordan, we know Kobe as we knew him because he
Hmm.
used comparison as that measurement tool to close the gap in the ideal that he saw true for himself. And so I think sometimes with imposter syndrome, we tend to we call it imposter syndrome, but we're actually falling into the comparison trap.
Mm. You just added some more for me to think about. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, hey,
I
I tell
appreciate
you,
that.
I know when I'm doing my job, when I get somebody to say, "I've never thought about it that way," or, "Yeah, I'm gonna have to think on that more." Like, that's how I know I'm doing my job, is giving you a kind of mindset shift or just kind of flipping something 180 for you to just think about a little bit different.
Yeah. Because that's why I like doing the podcast because I can throw an idea out there and I just like to see where it lands and see how it connects. And then now you gave it back to me. I'm like, okay, I have to dig a little bit deeper and think about it a little bit more just to keep refining it. It's never perfect, but, take one step closer to it. So I appreciate that. I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was your confidence journey? Like, what were you at as a young player all the way through the pros to where you're at now?
Up and down. I think every new level that I unlocked is kinda like my confidence typically started over again. Right? So,
Hmm.
like, I'm from New Mexico. Back in New Mexico, you can play varsity as an 8th grader. And so I played varsity in all 4 sports since 8th grade. And so, as an 8th grader, my confidence wasn't all that high. And then once I, went to college, it was kind of the same thing, like kind of started all over again. Then obviously going to pro in Greece kind of started all over again. And then
Mhm.
start coaching. It's in something new, it's something unfamiliar, kind of starts over. And what I've learned along the way, and I wish this is something that somebody would have told me as I was going through these confidence peaks and valleys, if you will, is that those moments of unfamiliarity feel scary to us because they're unfamiliar, not because we're incapable.
Mm.
Right? And so whenever you're feeling something new, you're going into something, you're leveling up, you're trying something again that's new, it's that unfamiliarity that scares us. Why? Because the outcome is uncertain. And when we're going into something unfamiliar, our brain hates unfamiliarity, by the way. And so whenever we're going and stepping into that, now all of a sudden we feel like we don't have the tools. Again, this is where imposter syndrome likely comes in, but it's just the fact that it's unfamiliar and uncertain that gets you feeling and thinking in that way.
Mm.
Never thought about it that way, huh?
That's a good one. I like that. I really like that. Um, Dang. I hate when it's that my brain wants to go on two different routes. I'm trying to figure out where to go. Okay. So you had a story before of how a teacher or something spoke against you playing with the guys, and it's like, hey, don't do that. That's not really for you to do. And that kind of took a little bit of life from you, little bit of confidence from you. How did that impact you? Because I know how you talked about earlier, like the external validation of confidence. And I feel like that kind of did the inverse of that and took some from you. So
Mm.
how did you kind of wrestle with that and kind of fight against that when they said that you basically can't do it?
Well, I think every human deals with this too, right? These are sources of poison. These are words of poison that start from an external source that we then internalize and use that to become our truth.
Mhm.
And it happens all the time. And so the story I think you're referring to, I was in 2nd grade. And at that point in time, again, small town, northern New Mexico, grew up playing with the boys. I mean, I grew up in the early 90s, right? Like there weren't girls' leagues back then. So I had to grow up playing with the boys. And I was just used to being the best. Like I was better than the boys at that age. And
Mhm.
during recess, one of the teachers, she wasn't my teacher, just a teacher at the school, she called me over, stern look on her face. And she just says, "Young lady, the way you're acting right now is an embarrassment. Little girls aren't supposed to play basketball. Little girls aren't supposed to play sports. So why don't you
Mhm.
stop acting like a little boy? Stop being an embarrassment and go play like with the little girls." And it's like I was in 2nd grade and I still remember this, right? Like that's how
Mhm.
powerful these words of poison are, especially when they come from an authority figure, especially as they come from, somebody that you somewhat look up to. Like this was somebody of authority when I'm in 2nd grade. Like this is a teacher, right? And if she's speaking this over me, then it has to be true.
Mhm.
And that's what we believe. And so this is sometimes where I say to like we get back to the first outer source of confidence, which is validation. And I ask young athletes all the time, how many of you have had a coach say something negative, demeaning, or demoralizing against you? Every hand tends to go up. And then I'll flip it and ask coaches, like, hey, how many of you have noticed if you have been demoralizing or demeaning, or were you just being a tough coach with tough love and high standards? Tough love, high standards. So along the way, there's some kind of a disconnect, right? And this is one of those communication pieces too, where how can us as coaches maintain that high standard with high support? Like I think that's the golden ratio right there, right? But also
Mhm.
understand too, like for us that are wanting that validation, how can we choose to listen and take in that feedback, coaching, criticism, whatever you want it, and learn from it instead of feeling attacked or defensive? And so it's a two-way street, right? And
Okay.
obviously I think both parties can kind of be at fault for this. Um, but again, can you identify what those words of poison are? And thankfully in 2nd grade, my teacher at the time, I think she had overheard this and she told me like, "Vera Joe, you could do anything you want. You're better than all the boys. Like I can totally see you. You're going to be an amazing athlete. You already are." So because instantly I had somebody speak power into me over that,
Mhm.
it wasn't that big of a deal. But then I often wonder like, what if my teacher hadn't stepped in? What if she hadn't
Yeah.
spoken those words of power into me? how different would that have molded the confidence, the mindset, the journey for myself? So it's
Mm.
just something to just be aware of as we continue to coach the confidence game to those we lead, love, and teach.
So how do you balance that? Because there's still a lot of old school mentality of my way or the highway. That's still prevalent in some spaces, and some of them are I have to cuss them out because they're not listening and being hard headed. But then they want to say the kids these days are so soft, and they're just like Kobe said, they're charming soft teddy bears. Like they just can't take anything. How do we find that middle ground of hold them accountable and give them that tough love and still building their confidence without going too far and demoralizing them?
So I think it comes back to that high standard, high support, right? And so I think a lot of times coaches have high standards, but they don't give high support. And one of the best ways to do that, I think, is can you, when you're giving your feedback, can you tell the truth with kindness? I think
Mm.
the kindness piece is what we're often missing because it's easy to bark orders, it's easy to yell what you're doing wrong, but can you be specific with that? Right? Like, can you be specific with that feedback? You can't just say you suck. You have to say why that athlete is sucking, right? Because if you
Mhm.
just say you suck, that's almost like an attack on character. But if you're specific with that feedback, criticism, coaching, whatever it is that you want to call it, now we're being not only aware, but we can tackle that AOI or whatever it is that we're trying to overcome without the athlete getting defensive. Because if you just come out and tell me that I suck, I'm getting defensive. I'm probably not going to listen and hear you out. But if you can be kind with that truth and give me specifics around that truth, now I'm more likely to have you coach me, right? Because you're not attacking my character. You're just showing me what I'm doing wrong, specifically with kindness.
Yeah, I heard you say try to pinpoint the action of what they're doing because that makes it more teachable for them. So it doesn't feel like you're attacking them. You're attacking the action and not them.
Right, right. And so, like, you could probably do this, like, when you're coaching up an athlete, let's just say something's wrong, you're noticing something's wrong with their form. Like, you just don't say, "You're doing it wrong again. Nope, that's not right. Nope, you suck. My gosh, why can't you just get this?" Like, you don't do that, right? What do?
Hmm.
You give specifics. You tell them, "Oh, your elbow, you're doing a chicken wing," right? You're giving them specifics on what they're doing wrong. So it's not an attack on them. It's just telling them and pinpointing, "I'm noticing that this is we're doing wrong." Even better if we can lead with questions. And I'm sure you've heard
Hmm.
this over and over again too. Instead of telling, ask. Hey, did you notice
Hmm.
what your elbow was doing on that last shot? Oh, no, I didn't notice. Oh, let's see if we can notice this time. Oh my gosh, I'm doing the chicken thing again, aren't I? Right.
Hmm.
And so when you can get athletes or whoever it is that you're leading, when you can get them to pinpoint that for themselves, it takes all the defensiveness away and it brings awareness to them. So now you're teaching them how to coach themselves.
Hmm.
And so the better you can get with leading with questions and getting them to come to that conclusion themselves, I think the better coach you'll be.
Mm. So outside of outside sources speaking negatively about the player, what are other big confidence killers? Things that take away the player's confidence. They just really shut down after that.
I think the biggest two confidence killers, dream killers, potential killers, frustration and doubt, hands down,
Mm.
frustration and doubt. And again, you get to any competitor, any high performer. Most of the time, I'm dealing with athletes who just give in to their frustration. They make a mistake, frustration takes over, negative body language, negative self talk, they're lost, right? And so I think the biggest thing that I find myself working with athletes through is frustration one and doubt two. Because once frustration takes over, doubt is not far behind,
Mm.
and vice versa. Like if you're doubting yourself, frustration isn't far behind either. Like that's another cyclical loop. Like it just kind of goes and goes and goes and goes. And so when it comes to frustration, like I just met with a young athlete yesterday and just talking about like how she just can't get over the fact where she just makes a silly mistake and she knows she's better than that. And so that's when I ran her through the growth cycle. And I just asked, like, you have a younger sister. Whenever she falls, does she get frustrated with herself? She's like, yeah, sometimes. It's like, yeah, because she's in the suck, she's in the struggle. But does she choose to get up and keep going? Like we're wired, right? Like the way that we're wired to just get up and keep going, to start pursuing through. But somewhere along the way, we allow these words of poison to infiltrate our thoughts. And now all of a sudden, we just get too frustrated. And now those words of poison come in. And now I start doubting myself. And now I think that I can't do it or I don't have what it takes. Like somewhere along the way, we lost our resilience. And then I get to the point too where I ask athletes that I work with, like, what does resilience feel like? Again, like when you're having to be resilient, when you are facing a challenge, when you are facing a struggle, when you are against and seeing that opposition face on, head on, what does that feel like? And I ask, like, does it feel good to anybody? How many of you think it feels really crappy? Everybody's hands goes up, right? And so again, it's one of those things like we talk about failure. When you're sitting in that failure, it doesn't feel good. When you're having to be resilient, it doesn't feel good. That's the struggle. And the longer you're able to sit with and handle that discomfort, the more success you'll find.
Mm,
But what I have found is often anytime we have any kind of discomfort, anytime we have any kind of struggle, especially in today's world, and this is not just youth, by the way, us adults are just as guilty of this. We find something to get away from that suck, struggle, or discomfort. We don't want to feel it,
mhm,
right? And so we'll grab our phone and we'll mindlessly scroll, or it's like, oh, I'll put on, we find something to distract ourselves instead of going head on and tackling that thing that we need to just continue with that growth cycle. Like, I'm in the struggle right now. I know I'm in the suck. But if you can see it for what it is, right? Like, that's where we get to the story of the white buffalo, which has been pretty popular the last 7 or so years. Have you heard of that story, the white buffalo?
mm. Haven't heard
So
that one.
it's performance psychology. Um, Basically, I guess researchers or something along the way, they found that American bison, right? We call them buffalo, American bison, when there is a storm coming, contrary to cattle, when a storm comes, cattle run away from the storm. And by them running away from the storm, they're actually prolonging their suffering because the storm just follows, right? Whereas bison, American buffalo, the white buffalo, they run straight into the storm. And by going head on into the storm and facing it head on, they get through it quicker. And then that's why you see that, buffalo covered in white. That's where you get the white buffalo from. And this is one of those things where you say, hey, just be a white buffalo. Like, see what it is that's sucking right now and just go get it head on. Because the longer you run away from it, now you're just no better than cattle. You're
Mm,
just running away from your problems. This is you staying locked up in your dead zone. The only way to get out of that dead zone is to have courage, right? Is actually be curious about what's going on. Because if you're actually curious about it, you're likely not going to be frustrated at the same time. Like, I don't know if those two can coexist. Like, when you're actually curious, I don't know if you can actually be frustrated at the same time. And if you're actually curious, I don't know if you can actually be fearful at the same time. Like, that's why I think curiosity is such a superpower, as long as it's
mm,
genuine, right? Like, if you're genuinely curious about something, then you're willing to embrace the suck. You're willing to embrace the struggle. You're willing to do what it takes to figure it out.
mm. I think that's a piece that made Kobe so resilient. And we glorify his mental toughness, but I think it's just because he wouldn't, like you said, he wouldn't get frustrated. He just stay curious about the problem. Like, what are they doing to make me miss my shot like this? What am I not figuring out? Okay. Hey, Jordan, how'd you figure out the fadeaway? What were you doing? Hey, Dr. J, what were you doing with this? Hey, Larry Bird, whoever he talked to, it's like, what am I missing that you figured out? And I think that's what kept him locked in and to be so great because he stayed curious and the curiosity fueled his resilience and mental toughness and that fueled his confidence and just the inner cycle of that. So new problem, like you said, new level comes. It's a new problem now. Okay, what am
Absolutely.
I? They double team me now. What am I missing out? Okay, hey, you did a lot of double teams. How do I figure this out? Boom. Now he just figured it out, and now he's scoring 81 points in the game. It's 60-point
For
games for a whole
absolutely,
month.
and you think about the superpower of Kobe, right? So, a couple of things. For one, when he says there was a reporter that asked him, and I'm sure you're familiar with this too. They say, "Do you hate to lose or love to win more?" And he said, "I'm neither. I
Mm-hmm.
play to figure things out." And this is where curiosity comes, right? And then we get to comparison again. So here's the other thing. Kobe wasn't afraid to call up MJ or Larry Bird or all these people. He studied, but that curiosity led him to study. So he never had envy. He just said, I could figure this out. And so I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something that as high performers, for whatever reason, instead of studying, we just allow envy to take over. But if we can just get to the point of like, if there's somebody ahead of you in whatever facet that is, whether that's athletic, whether they make more money than you, whether they're, whatever it is that your craft is, it means that they know something that you don't know. And you
Mhm.
just have to be curious and figure that out. Right. And so whenever envy comes, it's just a question like, what do they have that I want? And how can I figure out how to get that? Then all of a sudden, envy doesn't exist anymore because everything is figure outable. And again, I can say this because I deal with this too. Like, I'm not immune from envy. I deal with it. And that's why I have to study this stuff. And that's why I have to, be aware of all this stuff that happens because envy, if I allow it to go unchecked, it'll eat me alive. And I think that's the case for most high performers, most competitors, most achievers, most strivers, you know, pick a name. We all
Yeah.
tend to deal with it.
But wouldn't pride get in the way of that though?
How so? I
So
know
if
you're onto it, but yeah, you explain it.
so if I'm dealing with this issue, my pride says I need to figure it out myself.
Mm,
I don't want to show weakness like you were saying earlier of confronting my enemy basically or someone else who's above me and be like, "Hey, I'm struggling with sales. I'm struggling with my jump shot. How do I figure this out?" My ego says, "No, you the man. You can figure it out yourself. Why are you calling somebody else?"
mhm,
So wouldn't ego be kind of the prerequisite to kind of keep moving forward after that?
100%. Check your ego. Check your
Mm,
ego. Like, that's one of those things, like, where's your ego at? And I think more than anything, I think it's that ego that gets us to allow envy in that comparison game to just win time and time again. And I think this is why, like, you hear of Brene Brown and vulnerability and all that. I think that's why it's so powerful because so many of us have that big and inflated ego. And it's like, I'm not
mhm,
willing to ask for help. And I'll be the first to, like, yeah, same, 100%. Like, if I see somebody ahead of me, it's like, I'm not going to ask them for help. But if I can get over that, and maybe I don't start off by asking right away, right? Like Alex Hormozy, we both said we both watch his stuff. I'm not going to, like, even if I try to reach out, what are the chances of him actually responding or, but what can I do? I can study his stuff. I'm sure he has multiple books out, right? Like that's the
mhm,
beauty of the day and age that we live in is that information is not the problem. This brings me back to my favorite quote in the entire world right now. The greatest distance in the world is the distance between knowing and doing. The greatest
mhm,
distance in the world is the distance between knowing and doing. Most of us have the information at our fingertips. We all tend to know what we need to do. The problem is in the actual doing. And sometimes I think we tend to use our ego as an excuse for not doing something,
mm,
right? That just then it becomes an excuse. But if you want something bad enough, I think of Kobe, he didn't allow his ego to get in the way of his greatness. How many people do you know that their ego got in the way of their greatness, especially in professional athletics? And now you see it rolling into college athletics,
mm.
right? Ego sometimes keeps you locked up in your dead zone more than anything else. You and you yourself only have the key to get out, but you got to check your ego. How you do that, I'm still studying it. So I don't know. I don't have the answer on how to check your ego. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Well, when you figure it out, you got to come back on so we can talk about it and figure it out because
Okay.
that's a kryptonite of mine too. But okay, it's a lot of stuff we've covered. So let's try to put it into a concise blueprint, if we can say. So, starting from scratch or we're starting from zero, I need to build my confidence, figure it out. What's the first step that we're going to take?
Identify your words of poison.
Mm,
Identify those words of poison. First and foremost, identify those negative things whenever you're upset with yourself. You make a mistake, you're embarrassed, you're frustrated. Like anytime you have any kind of negative emotion, feeling, what are you telling yourself? Bring awareness back to that. Then you got to flip the script and switch that into a statement of power or a word of power, right? And then you got to look at those outer sources of confidence and be honest with yourself and self reflect, hold up the mirror and ask yourself, am I using any of these three outer sources of confidence? And that's validation, comparison, and recent success. Am I allowing any of those to be the foundation of my confidence? And it's okay if it's yes. I mean, working with pro athletes and they're staring like, holy moly, I didn't know that recent success was my number one thing. right? So if you can be honest with it and it's like, okay, I'm aware of this now. I'm not going to allow that to be my foundation. Now I'm going to start focusing on these inner sources of confidence. And so, more than anything, too, I think you need to answer that question for yourself. Where do you get your confidence from?
Mm,
Because when you can pinpoint it and identify the source of that confidence, then we can start building it up. Or if it's an outer source, now we can pivot and start building it up on a steadier, sturdier foundation.
mm. So I feel like the first step would be knowing where your confidence is at, like you were saying. So knowing what your foundation is, and then kind of identify the words of poison. That be right?
Yeah, that's usually the way I get it there. That's where I start.
Mm.
I guess I put the cart in front of the horse. But it
I
can
mean,
work
I'm
both
just trying
ways
to figure it
too,
out.
because honestly, it's like there are some times too where athletes are, I don't know. I don't know where I get my confidence from. But more than anything, if you can just be aware of your words of poison, we can then identify where your confidence comes from that awareness. Right. So like, yeah, answer that question for yourself. But at the same time, like, that's
Mm.
and here's the thing, it's like whenever I'm working with an individual client, it's never the same. It's always
Yeah.
based on where they're at, right? We got to meet them where they're at.
Hmm.
So whether you start with your words of poison first or identifying, I mean, you can do both of them within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And so here's another thing too. When you think about, have you heard of the rule of 100?
Hmm.
Yep. So what's
Yeah.
the rule
Yeah.
of 100?
Well, it might not be the same one, but from Hormozy, he was saying, basically judge it based off the hundreds. So if I want to do this task and I feel like I'm doing it to my best, times it 100, basically, to kind of as the minimum, I basically you can say what you want to do.
Okay. So my rule of 100, or there's a different rule of 100 out there. So the rule of 100 states that if you put in 100 hours to any endeavor, you will be better than 95% of the world in that thing. So just 100 hours, you're better than 95% of the world. But then here's my question. What are you doing to separate yourself from the rest of the best? Within that 5%, because just 100 hours in any given thing puts you in the top 5% of the world. But within that 5%, what are you doing to separate yourself from the rest? And so when you think about 100 hours, if you were to break that down into a day, that equates to 18 minutes a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about 1% better. And this has become a cliche too. It's like, oh, you just got to be 1% better, 1% better. And I don't know if it's just the way that I'm wired, but like these cliches that you see around these days, it's just like, how? Tell me how. And
Hmm.
it's another thing too, like you hear coaches all the time, you just got to be mentally tough. You got to be mentally strong. Great. Have you defined for your athletes what that means? 1% better. You just got to get 1% better. Great. Have you defined for your athletes and staff and culture what that means?
Hmm.
And I think sometimes what happens and the traps we fall into is we just give into this lingo or these words that sound great or these cliches and so said it, so it must have some prevalence. And so we just say
Hmm.
these words blindly without understanding the meaning behind it. But if you actually go deeper, and honestly, I think this is what's missing in coaching these days. Everybody scratches the surface, nobody goes deep. And so
Yeah.
when you actually get deep, like what is 1% better? Like tell me what that means. Well, 1% of your day is 14 minutes and 24 seconds. I round up. I call these your daily 15s. And so can you, whether it's 100 hours in a year, 1% of your day, can you go 15 to 18 minutes working on your ideal, the thing that you're trying to be great at? If you're a basketball athlete or a basketball player, great, volleyball player, whatever it is, what can you do for 15 or 18 minutes a day on top of your team practice that you're already doing to separate
Hmm.
yourself from the rest? And this is often, I think, what we are missing is like,
Yeah.
what can you do above and beyond? And then we get to the point of the 3 gears, like the 3 gears that make up the complete athlete. And there's three things, not just as an athlete, but just as humans. There are three things and three things only that we can train. We can train our body, we can train our craft, and we can train our mind. Body, craft, mind. Most of the time, most anybody only ever spends time training up their body and their craft. Not a lot of people spend any time training up here, but then you study the greats. Kobe Bryant spent a lot of time training his mindset. LeBron James spends a lot of time training his mindset, right? Like you think about anybody who's a household name, and it's likely that they spend time focusing on all 3 gears. And so this is my challenge, right? So you could have spent the last 53 minutes listening to this episode, and are you going to use it as entertainment or knowledge?
Mhm.
Because I think the greatest form of intelligence is how fast you can change. How fast can you take information that you just learned and put it into action? This is where we go back to that quote, the greatest distance in the world is the distance between knowing and doing. So we just spent close to an hour talking about multiple things that you can implement into your life to be more confident, to have a stronger mental game. But my question to you is, will you do any of them? Or once you close the app, stop listening to this episode, will you just go about your day? Albert Einstein, the
Yeah.
definition of insanity, right? It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, if you do what you always did, you're going to get what you've always gotten. So, how can you just take the one thing? Just start with 2 minutes. It doesn't even have to be 15. Start habit stacking. What's something you can just do for 2 minutes? Maybe you just sit with yourself after every practice or every competition or whatever it is that you have. And you just sit with yourself for 2 minutes. It could even be 60 seconds. And just ask yourself, what did I tell myself that didn't serve me today? Did I have any words of poison? And just open up your notes app in your phone and just have a running list, right? Just be aware of it. Just sit with yourself. Give your time and brain space to identify what those are.
Mm, that's beautiful, man. 'Cause I think that would be the second step. So once we build the self awareness and knowing either where our poisonous words are or knowing where we're putting our confidence in, the next step will be our 15 minutes, like a defined 1%, like you were saying. So now we're putting the 15 minutes in, whether it's, let's say we're focusing on the mental work, it's all confidence. Now it would be figuring out that mental game of redefining and uh what's the word you used before? When you flip the poisonous words. I forgot what you
Flip the
said.
script.
Yes, flip the script. So
Okay.
could you say like the 15 minutes to flip the script would be the next step of what you could do?
I mean, I don't think there's steps that you have to follow to be more confident. Right. And so I don't
Mm,
think it's a one size fits all approach. I think, like, as the listeners are listening to this, it's just like, there's something that spoke to you today. Take that thing and try it. Don't try. I think sometimes this is where we get in trouble. It's like, oh, this is a prescription Coach VJ gave, so I have to do
mhm,
this and this and this. And like, that's where we fall off the wagon, right? It's not a one size fits all. Everybody's different. That's why there's multiple sources of confidence, right? And so don't fall into that trap of thinking I got to do this, 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 and this. And I can't do this until I, like, just try it.
yeah.
Just find whatever spoke to you and then try the thing, right? And this is what
Mhm,
I've learned along the way too. When I was early in my career as a mental performance coach, I felt like I had to pack as much value as I could into that 50 minutes that I was working with that athlete. And so oftentimes I would leave them with like 7 or 8 things. And what I learned is, when you give them too much, they get overwhelmed and they don't do any of it. And so now when I'm working with clients, I give them 3 things max, max. Most of the time, I'm just giving them 1 or 2. Right. And that's where we start habit stacking. So once you master that thing, or once you feel really good about that thing, okay, now let's add something else on, because that's just become a habit now. Right.
mhm,
And so what I would say is, instead of trying to prescribe something, just take the thing that you heard in this episode where it struck a chord and go do that thing.
mhm. So that would be like the key piece of advice to leave them with. Like, hey, whatever you picked up, was whatever struck a chord with you, whatever the key thing that just you still thinking about that we said from 2 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, how quickly can you act on that? That would be the key thing to leave them with.
100%. If you can take action from one thing in this podcast, you are better than 95% of the world. Greatest distance in the world is a distance between knowing and doing. So if you can take an action, and then just let this sink in. Every podcast you listen to, can you take one action and implement it? Implement, right? Implementation is what we're looking after. Every podcast you listen to, every book you read, right? I think we sometimes get caught up in this knowledge accumulation. It's like, great, you have all this knowledge. What are you doing with it? Show me where it's
Mm,
implemented in your life. Show me where it's implemented in your game. And you see this all, like, you hear people raving, oh, I read 50 books this year. I read 100 books this year. It's great. I don't see any difference in the way that you're living or the way that you're showing up. And so that's great for you for entertainment. But how are you allowing it to change your life? How are you allowing it to show up in the actions and the daily routines and habits and rituals that you deal with or that you have? And so more than anything else, it's just like, just start with one. Start with one. And then once you can do that thing, then what's the next thing on the list? But just pick one thing and go from there.
Yeah, they used to be me. I used to be one of the guys. I read this many books this month, or this many books, and I did all this stuff. And then I don't remember what the core that struck with me was. And I looked up one day. I'm like, man, I did all this accumulation of knowledge, but I'm still in the same spot, or I'm only 1 or 2 steps ahead. So the amount of what I consumed and took in versus the action steps I took is a lot different. And so I think that's the most impactful thing in life is to really just actually start taking steps. How quickly can you go from new information to action, like you were saying? And I think that's really what sparks the confidence too, is really knowing that we can uh, take the first step as soon as possible. And that's what we love to see is like, okay, I took the first step and I did something. And that's where the failure comes. Okay, I messed up, but now curiosity kicks in and say, okay, I messed up. Why did I mess up? How can I fix it? How can I get better? And that truly builds the confidence because I'm learning now at a rapid pace to where you look up and it's like, man, how did she grow so fast? How did she get so much better so fast? Because I took the time to go from new information to implementation, learn from that because I was curious, and I'm on to the next step now. So I think that's the
And
bar
if
right
we
there
tie back
to
the growth cycle, it's just how long again are you willing to sit with and handle that discomfort, right? So you go from learning something to practicing and you suck at it. Most
mm,
people just look at the next shiny thing and they start all over again. But the more you can just go through that process, go all the way through it until you get to at least the perform stage, like it's something that you can implement in life. You might not be thriving yet, but at least give yourself the space to just go through that cycle. We have this like
mm,
shiny object where it's like, oh, I'm going to try that next, try that next. And it's like, well, no wonder why you're not growing because you're trying to chase 300 different rabbits. Like, catch one
yeah,
first.
yeah,
Awesome. This was great today.
yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you feel like, man, I wish you would have asked this or something that I'm missing?
Oh, gosh, not that I can think of. No, this was a great conversation. This was great.
Well, I appreciate it. And I know the listeners have to appreciate it too. Um, I know somebody has to be wondering, like, man, she seems so cool. She's speaking my language. I would love to work with her. How can they figure out the level of working with you and what that looks like?
Yeah, just head to coachvj.com or mentalitysolutions.com. You can find all the information there. Sign up for a newsletter, free newsletter every other week. Really, I think will serve in a lot of different areas. And then if you want to start with working, I always just say, hey, let's start with the confidence online course first. Availability one on one is limited. So I would say let's go with that. And then if you still feel like "Oh, I just got to work with Coach VJ, just, go to mentalitysolutions.com, fill out an application, and we'd go from there.
Well, I think that's it because I think you gave too many gems away. Like you said, you don't want to give too much game away. You
Oh,
want to just take the one or
that's
two steps
not
and
even the tip of the iceberg. I could tell you my curriculum goes pages and pages deep. Like, yeah, this is all out there already.
yeah. So this is something solid. I feel like they can really. We could have cut the podcast to 5 minutes of just we talked about implementation. Really, just that's the whole episode right there. They just took that, went to other episodes they listened to, and just did that. That's the key right there.
For sure.
Well, that's it. It's coming to it. And thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Thank you everybody for tuning in and listening. Go build your blueprint. Go take what she said, implement it, and build your confidence that way rather than just listen to this episode, listen to the next one, listen to the next one she was on, and just keep doing that. Actually go take the steps and do something. But tune into the next video too. Don't not listen. Like still do that. But without further ado, see you on the next episode.